Good morning, everyone. I am Lynne Zydowsky, and on behalf of Joel Marcus and myself, Alexandria Real Estate Equities is honored to be here with you today speaking on this important topic. We'd like to express our sincere appreciation to the Galien Foundation team, their leader, Bruno Cohen, for their commitment to the industry and perseverance in bringing today's program to us during this pandemic. To the Galien co-chairs, Dr. Sue Desmond-Hellman and Dr. Michael Rosenblatt, for their incredibly compelling program you assemble each year at the Galien Forum. To the Pre-Galien Awards Committee for your tireless work to recognize and honor impactful innovation that benefits patients the world over. And a very special thank you to Dr. Roy Vagelis for his visionary leadership over the many years. Today, we're going to focus our discussion on the COVID-19 vaccine development and its impact on life science innovation and the industry's mission-critical role in finding solutions that save lives. As we've all experienced these last 8 months, COVID-19 has had a profound impact on every aspect of our life. It represents the greatest threat to public health and global security in over a century. As we'll discuss today, the life science industry is mobilized to rapidly advance groundbreaking science, innovative clinical trials, and unprecedented collaborations across the ecosystem that will enable solutions to this global pandemic. As clinical trials promising impactful therapeutics and vaccines and more efficient and effective testing move towards completion, in parallel, we're entering an extremely challenging time in the winter months coming ahead and likely into the spring of 2021. Today, there were 8.9 million cases in the US and 227,000 deaths, which represent 20% of the 1 million deaths globally. Last Friday, we hit a new high of 83,000 cases per day in the United States, and France has emerged as the epicenter of the second wave that's sweeping Europe. Europe continues to struggle with new curfews and lockdowns in hope of curbing the new infections. Recently, Scott Gottlieb on CNBC made this quote: "We're probably in the 7th inning of the acute phase of this pandemic right now, but the hardest part is ahead. Rising COVID-19 cases across the nation indicate the US is entering a pretty difficult period. There's really no backstop here. I think we are right now at the cusp of what is going to be an exponential spread in parts of the country." So as we narrow in on the paradigm shifting solutions, we are though making progress, and science has been our North Star. We can now test over 1 million people daily to screen for those with active virus. We have 2 extremely promising antibody therapeutics under review by the FDA for EUA. We are awaiting the approval of not one, but multiple vaccines, with 5 leading vaccines in late-stage clinical trials. And we have, as of last week, our first full approval for a COVID therapeutic with Gilead's antiviral remdesivir. So amidst this background, we are honored to have with us today 2 renowned industry leaders behind some of the most promising COVID-19 vaccine candidates, offering us hope that there will be more effective management of this pandemic and its broad consequences. They, alongside their organizations, are committed to bringing a safe and effective vaccine to the FDA approval and scaling the manufacturing to provide widespread access. And with that, I'd like to welcome both Stéphane Bancel, CEO of Moderna, and Dr. Paul Stoffels, the Executive Vice President and Chief Scientific Officer of J&J. We're going to start today by talking about the science behind each of the vaccines. As you know, Moderna and J&J are 2 of the front runners in the global race to develop a vaccine to hopefully address the COVID-19 pandemic. Both companies are manufacturing at risk, and they're preparing to distribute more broadly in 2021. Coming into Q4 2020, we have multiple shots on goal with data from Moderna and Pfizer expected by the end of November. And with that, I'd like to start with Stéphane Bancel. I have a question for you, Stéphane. Moderna was founded 10 years ago to create this class of transformative medicines based on the genetic sequence of mRNA. Stéphane, I think we need to, I just want to make sure that the audience has Stéphane on the screen. We have Paul here, or we have both. Stéphane, did you ever think you'd be in a position you are in today in the race for a vaccine to fight the biggest pandemic in a century?
Well, Lynn, good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me. Obviously not. I had read about the Spanish flu. I had the chance to be working in infectious disease for 25 years, and I'd read about it, but I never thought I will see a global pandemic like the one we're all living through. And so, no, I never thought this was going to happen, and that Moderna will have such a big role.
And what happened initially to start the work that was needed to generate this lead for the COVID vaccines?
Yeah, so actually we had been working with Dr. Fauci's team over the last few years, working on a few emerging pathogens that we all thought could come back. And one of them was MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which everybody now knows is also a coronavirus. And so we had been doing a lot of preclinical work trying to identify the best antigen to make an mRNA-based vaccine against MERS. And this was very helpful because when we learned in the first few days of January that this was a coronavirus, and once we got the sequence, the genetic sequence published online by the Chinese, our teams were able in just 2 days, basically studying the sequence, doing 3D modeling of a protein structure to confirm that most probably the spike protein, the same one that we're showing in the MERS vaccine, was the best one to use, giving us in animal model the best efficacy. Was most probably a good bet, and that's what we did. We basically on January 13 locked down the vaccine design and starting racing to the clinic. In 42 days, we're able to ship product to the NIH, and in early March, Dr. Fauci and his team started the phase 1 of mRNA 1273.
So you've described a little bit of the platform, but talk about how the COVID vaccine will actually work. I mean, many have said that if the mRNA technology, does work to bring forward this vaccine, it has the potential to transform how we develop vaccines in the future.
Yes, I mean, if you think about it, mRNA is an information molecule. It codes, using the 4 letters of life, you can code anything you want. And so the technology that we use to make our COVID-19 vaccine is exactly the same technology that we use for Zika vaccine or CMV vaccine. You just have to adapt to the biology of a virus. In the case of CMV, we have 6 different mRNA in each vial to make 6 different proteins, because it's what the scientists and the clinician think is the right biology to train the immune system so that if later you get an infection, your antibodies will be able to neutralize the virus. And so it's an information technology, so that what is really hard is to get the technology to work safely. And that's why we spent, literally a couple $2 billion since we started to get all this working with the help also of some big pharma companies and some academic groups, including, Dr. Fauci. But if our COVID vaccine gets to the finish line, in the next, month or so, it would be an incredible de-risking for the entire platform, because the next product coming behind it is going to use exactly the same chemistry to make the mRNA molecule, exactly the same manufacturing process in the same rooms by the same people. And we use the same chemistry to do the formulation, what you put around the mRNA to protect it and to get it into the right cells in the human body.
Now, maybe just, I want to transition over to the clinical trials, because everybody's so focused on that. And it is possible that you'll have data and apply for an EUA later this month. You recently announced that you had completion of the enrollment. So that's 30,000 people. So fast. You started enrolling those individuals in July 27th of this year. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about the demographics, and even in September, you actually flowed the trial to ensure that you had the right demographics. So tell us a little bit about the clinical trial.
Sure. So, I mean, as everybody knows, the minority groups have been, highly impacted by this virus and the disease across the country. And so as we're doing the phase 3, we had a great start. But what we realized as we were tracking this on a daily basis is that we had not enough minorities. And what we worried a lot about is that if we don't have enough data to represent the minorities, especially, Latino, Latinx, Black, African American, that it could be a big problem in terms of the use of a vaccine and people's willingness to take the vaccine because they will not feel confident that the vaccine might work and might be safe for them. And so what we did, which was one of the hardest decisions I had to take this year, is we decided to slow down enrollment. As you know, we're all chasing this virus, all the companies, all the teams around the world are chasing this virus, and we know every day counts. I mean, we lost another 1,000 Americans yesterday, many more lives around the world. And so it was a really hard one, but it was, I really believe, the right decision to do. And so we slowed down some sites that were not performing well in enrolling minorities. We told them you cannot recruit anymore. And some sites that were doing well, we provided them more resources. It was quite hard because if you look at the kind of early September time point, I think we're 5% Black or African American, and we're at 10% now that the study is fully enrolled. We are 20% Latino. And so we feel really good about where we are in terms of minorities, but also in terms of age group. As we know, the elderly are highly affected by the disease. And so it was also very important for us to have a lot of people above 65 across all those different ethnic groups. And so one of the things we feel really proud of, and again, it has been a big team effort. I mean, Dr. Fauci and his team at NIH have been helping us a lot too, and PPD, our CRO, has done an amazing job. Now that the study is fully enrolled, if you look at the demographics, and anybody interested, I invite you to go online on our website. You can get access to all the demographic data from our front page. They are very consistent with the American population. Same thing with people at high risk, people with diabetes, heart failure. All those are represented in large numbers, which we think is going to be very important to give confidence in the efficacy and safety of a vaccine in all those populations.
And is this trial just in the US, or have you recruited outside the US?
No, given our size, Moderna is only 1,200 people, and we were 800, at the beginning of the spring. We focused on the US. What we discussed with regulatory agencies around the world is for most of them, we do not need to do new studies. There might be a couple Asian countries where we need to run some small studies, which we're going to do. But in Europe, in Canada and other places, people are very comfortable using the phase 3 from the US.
And you reported recently that over 25,000 of the participants of the 30,000 have gotten their second shot. So explain a little bit about the thought process and how you decided that you needed 2 doses of this.
Yeah, so when we look at the data, both in preclinical model and in animals, we always saw a much higher antibody level and longer duration of protection by doing a boost, because as we all know, we are all naive to this virus. And if you look at it, even AstraZeneca, which started initially with 1 dose, decided based on the clinical data to do the phase 3 with 2 doses. And so we always thought that to provide maximum protection, despite, of course, it is not as easy to manage the logistics of dosing somebody twice versus dosing somebody once. But what we're trying to really solve for is the highest efficacy that we can, especially in the elderly. We are very pleased, and we published in New England, that in the elderly group, we have the same level of neutralizing antibody than in the young adults. And that's, for us, is very important. For some of the vaccines, you see a big drop between young adults and the elderly. And again, given the elderly, represents around 80% of the death, we wanted to make sure that we had the best vaccine. And it's the same thing, Lynne, as we pick the dose. We spend a lot of time in the spring to literally agonize about do we do 50 microgram or 100 microgram? And 50, of course, would have been better in terms of manufacturing output, because if you take 100 microgram, you're going to just halve your manufacturing capacity by just taking that one decision. And so we spent a lot of time, and trust me, the manufacturing team was trying to advocate to pick the 50 microgram dose. But what we said is, look, we're going to try to get the best product we can out there, because there's so much hurt happening that we need to give it our best shot. And so do we think we can protect some people with 1 dose? We think so. If you look at some of the neutralizing antibody after 1 dose and some of the animal model, you can. So maybe, 25-year-old with 1 dose will be enough. But do we feel confident we can protect a 65 or 70-year-old with comorbidity and a weaker immune system on one dose, we didn't want to take the risk. There's so much at stake here that we want to maximize the efficacy of this vaccine.
And I know everybody is anxiously awaiting the, release of the data that will allow you to apply for an EUA. And there was just a Wall Street Journal article last week where you said, probably the end of November, and then the EUA would be in the 1st of December. So 2 questions, what do you have to see to be able to apply for that EUA? And what do you think the timing is?
Yeah, so on the timing of a first interim, we feel confident that we should have first interim readout in November. Our attack rate in the study is tracking very nicely to the attack rate at the zip code level. Our team is doing projection, all computer simulation on a daily basis, and we're tracking very, very well. So given, unfortunately, the high rate of infection that you talked about, Lynne, a few minutes ago across the country, what the team did a very nice job back in the June-July timeframe is, as the epidemics was moving into the south from the northeast and into the Midwest, this is where actually most of our sites have been located by design, because we anticipated that we should have more cases there versus, let's say, in Boston or New York comes the fall. And we've been lucky that what we planned for happened. And so we believe with the attack rate we're seeing now, November is when we're going to get the first interim readout, assuming it's positive on the efficacy. The second thing, of course, is safety. The FDA has been wonderful because they have given us as an industry, very clear guidelines. Back in June, they said at least 50% efficacy, 30,000 at least participants in a phase 3, 50-50 placebo. So for us, industry, having very clear guidelines is much easier than guessing the guidelines and taking a lot of risk. The other piece we have told everybody in the industry recently, before they published the guideline to the public, is that they expect at least for half of the participants to have at least 2 months of safety data after the second dose for vaccines that have, like our vaccines, two doses. And so we're going to get to that time point in the second half of November. So if you look at the data, it's nicely converging that in November sometime, we're going to get the first interim analysis done. We will have in the second half of November cross that safety threshold that the FDA has defined. On CMC manufacturing, which of course is very important, we're already filing as we go all the different parts of CMC so that CMC is not critical path to a filing. And this is a piece that we discuss a lot with the FDA so that we ensure that if safety is there, if efficacy is there, we don't want to waste any more days because we are not ready manufacturing-wise. And of course, quality of a product is really important. Those are sterile products. You inject them in healthy people. So quality, like safety of the ingredient itself is super important. And so we think we're going to be indeed able toward the end of November, early December to file an EUA. And then, as the FDA has articulated, they will do a VRPAC committee, an AdCom for every vaccine before making a decision. And so we expect that process to move pretty smoothly because, again, we are currently losing 1,000 Americans a day. And I will not be surprised, given the high infection rate we are seeing across the country and rising every week, that number, unfortunately, I anticipate will be higher in a month from now.
And then last question before we switch to Paul, how does that play out then in terms of, let's say you get the EUA approval and being able to do the first vaccinations? Will you do those in December of 2020?
So what we are getting ready with Operation Warp Speed, which we are partnered with, as you know, is we are on track to have at least 20 million doses made before the end of the year. And in Q1, we'll have at least in the US 100 million doses made. And so what we're working with Operation Warp Speed is to be able to start shipping as soon as we get EUA approval. We are trying to really see how do you get the same day or the day after the trucks pulling back into the warehouse, loading the vaccine and starting to ship them to the US government to be distributed right away.
Wow. Amazing. So I'd like to shift over to you, Paul. You're considered a pioneer in global public health. You started your career as a physician in Africa. You focused on HIV and tropical diseases. You've steered J&J through multiple infectious disease outbreaks, including SARS, Ebola, Zika, and AIDS, as well as spearheading the company's strategy to make innovative medicines and technologies accessible in the world's most vulnerable communities. So here we are today facing an urgent public health crisis. How does COVID-19 pandemic compare to these other outbreaks that you've worked in and experienced?
Well, yeah, this, of course, Lynn, is the largest global challenge there is in the last century. So a health challenge, and that's where it doesn't compare to anything. Although from a virology perspective, there are a lot of different comparisons we can make. In the late 80s, early 90s, when HIV became a global pandemic, less infectious than this virus. Industry pulled together with government regulators and very quickly started developing drugs. A vaccine is still not there because of the very challenging virus and the mutation, the mutability of the virus. But so that was the first time that I think there was a very, very active global collaboration to solve a pandemic. And today, if people get access to their medicine, they can live lifelong. Yeah? So with an HIV infection today, you can live lifelong, provided you take your medicine. And we have gone on to now long-acting injectables for treatment, but also for HIV, now a vaccine. If you look at the vaccines we have been involved with, then the most challenging at a certain time was Ebola, where it's a different challenge. You have a highly infectious vaccine virus in the middle of Africa with a lethality of 90% if you don't do anything. So it was brought back with all types of interventions to 50, 60, 70%. Today, there are two vaccines, is approved by EMA, and you have the Merck vaccine, but it took us some very significant challenges to develop that because clinical trials in the middle of a very challenging environment in Central Africa is different than do it in the West. So, and if you look at Zika, we were very quickly on the ball for a vaccine for Zika. We were able to make a single dose vaccine, which we tested in the clinic, but the virus went away. And then we have worked on RSV, which is also a respiratory virus, where we have very good results at the moment, and we are progressing that through the clinic and hopefully through the market. So a lot of experience with the vector, the Ad26 vector, as well as manufacturing quality and the whole process of developing vaccines for infectious diseases.
And I believe that this vaccine candidate uses the same vector that you used for the Ebola vaccine. Is that correct?
That's correct. We use a human adeno vector, which has been optimized over the years for maximum immunogenicity. And that we have selected that vector as well as worked on it to get to a vector which generates a significant antibody response, but also cellular immunity response, so that you can have long-term protection for the diseases we wanted to target. At the same time, we optimized manufacturing, and that we optimize the cell line for maximum manufacturing. And I can tell you today, we can definitely produce 1 billion vaccine dosages for next year on a cellular system that works. We also optimized stability. We will be able to, if our vaccine is there, to have a stability of 2 to 8 Celsius for distribution to the normal vaccine networks. And that's very important in the developing world, in the Gavi countries, in the countries where there are less, let's say, developed healthcare systems and distribution systems to deal with that. We also focused very hard on the single dose. In Zika, we used a single dose. In RSV, we used a single dose. And we were able to translate very good animal model work to humans, and were able to show very strong immunogenicity, short and long term, with a single dose. I won't say that for boosting, probably if we need to have a very long protection, you always need boosting, but the question is when. But for the pandemic approach at the moment, we do our study with a single dose. And we have shown in the clinical studies, the phase 1-2, that we have good immunogenicity, both antibody and cellular. And as Stéphane was talking about, also demonstrated in elderly that very good immunogenicity in elderly, equal to the young people. And we had that already, what we did in RSV, we learned it there. We know what to do in the elderly and also for COVID now, and we will be able to repeat that. Yeah.
I mean, you've been moving incredibly fast on your clinical development timeline. You even accelerated that. So where are you today? I know you're just starting the phase 3, but you also have the largest trial at 60,000.
Well, first, the clinical development of the vector itself has gone now over the last 6 years, and we have generated more than 100,000 people's safety with a vector. And a vector you can see as a horse of Troy, where you bring a piece of genetic material with a carrier into a human, and it's more than 95% of the vaccine is that vector, and that's very much responsible for the safety, but also, of course, for the immunogenicity. We have vaccinated now more than 100,000 people with Ebola. We have a very good clinical experience, so we were able to go quite fast in preclinical and clinical as we had the experience. Where are we with the clinical trials? We optimized our vector in the first 3 months of the year. Then we did the animal work and selected the vector, which went into large clinical trials while we started upscaling. And so our phase 1 studies were done starting mid-July to mid-September. And we have now most of that data, which then led to the start of the phase 3. We kicked off a phase 3 study mid-September, which is now ongoing, and we focus on 60,000 people globally, of which 30,000, half of them will be in the US, half of them will be in Latin America and South Africa and Southern Africa, and hopefully then demonstrate both in the Western population, but also in the very diverse population in the rest of the world on what we can achieve with the vaccine. We have like 180 centers running in the world, and like Stéphane explained, it's like a lot of data science work, epidemiology on where to go. And also since the summer, our teams have been trying to predict where to be with the vaccine at the moment of when we were going to start the study mid-September. Unfortunately, it's now going surging everywhere. And so that might be a benefit for the clinical trial, but it's also a challenge for the logistics to get everything done in COVID times. But it's such a priority that it's going well. And I think hopefully we can recruit the study in the next 2 to 3 months, depending on participation rate, because we need to motivate people to join the studies.
For sure. You recently paused your clinical trial, but you announced last Friday that you're going to restart it. And I think, this is a large audience watching us today, and I think it's really good to talk about, kind of that process and why you did it, what the outcome was, and how just important it is overall in developing these vaccines.
Yeah, it's very important that we follow the normal procedure in clinical trials. If you hit a serious unexpected adverse event, you look at whether that is related, yes or no. And since it was an unexpected event, what you do, then you pause the study and learn what is happening, and then you come to the conclusions. And here we work very closely with the DSMB. A pause is something a company does. We do that ourselves. We say we want to learn and then go forward. And so in interaction with the regulatory authorities, FDA and EMA in Europe and others in the world, as well as the DSMB, we appointed a number of external experts. Those external experts then evaluate together with the safety teams in the company on what is the relationship, and then discuss that with the DSMB as well as with the regulators. And in this case, we could not establish a link between the vaccine and the side effect. And after that conclusion, we were allowed, both the DSMB and the regulators agreed that we could continue. This is a normal clinical trial process, but it also shows that we respect that we protect maximum the participants in the study. We want to know what we do first before we put further people on the trial. And it happens in trials. It happens very often in trials. And that's part also of the transparency. Like Stéphane was saying, we are very transparent on everything. Protocols are published, data are published immediately when they are available. We'll publish the diversity. Everything in the clinical trial is now open to the public. The only thing we can't do is data privacy. We have to respect the privacy of patients and participants, and that's why we can't provide more details, but the investigators know, the regulators know, and they should provide the confidence to the public that we do the right thing.
Maybe last question before we bring Stéphane back. Do you think that, or do you have any insight whether this vaccine will be more like a flu vaccine, you know, with what you've seen so far, and antibody durability that we'll be taking it year after year, that'll need to be modified each year?
Yeah. Well, I hope that it won't be like the flu with a virus with changes, because that's going to be a real challenge if this virus would change every year and we'll be confronted with a new one. But what probably will need to be happen is that this is not going to be over in 6 to 12 months. So if we'll have to protect maybe for 2 to 3 years before the entire world will be able to get rid of this virus. And that's where most probably boosting will need to happen. It's not that it is a new virus, but it's like you have to up your antibodies and your immune response 1 year later to make sure you're protected for that. And we all have to learn together, and the whole industry with the scientific community, on what time frames we need to boost. We don't know anything yet. The virus is new. Maybe the antibodies are protecting for a long time and the cellular immunity reboosts immediately when you get re-exposed, but we don't know that yet. And that's why we have to keep all options open and don't assume at the moment that one shot or 2 shots, a boosted shot, and we are there. We probably will have to continue for a longer time protecting the population before the virus will be eliminated. And I'm pretty convinced it can be eliminated. Yeah, if you look at Ebola came there and is eliminated in combination with hygiene and vaccination. It was eliminated. Zika was eliminated. There are viruses which absolutely can be eliminated. And if we work together on preventive measures and vaccine and therapy, and we all collaborate on that, in several years, we should, in 1, 2, maximum 3 years, we should get rid of this virus. And that must be the mission of everyone in the world. As long as this is around, it will cause disease, it will cause deaths, and the most vulnerable first, our grandparents and ourselves.
With that, I'd like to bring Stéphane back and have the two of you, you know, in an open discussion as we talk about some of the critical issues that have come up over the course of these last 8 months. I just want to say too briefly, I know that there's a survey, there's 2 questions that are going out to the audience, and we'll come back at the end and we'll look at what the response was for those 2 questions. So maybe just coming ahead and bringing Stéphane back into the conversation with Paul and myself. The first topic I'd like to discuss is operating at this massive scale and cost, and the importance and impact of these public-private partnerships on being able to operate at this scale. So first, what does it mean to operate at this scale, and what does it mean to manufacture at risk? So either one of you, or both?
Well, I can start here. This is operate at the scale, and we as a large pharmaceutical company, we have the organization trained to do this. We go fast in cancer therapy. We go fast in antivirals, in many. So the system is organized to do this, but not at this scale. And there, I think the collaboration with the NIH, with the NIAID, but also the regulators in the world. This has been an unprecedented collaboration between public and private. You cannot imagine how many people from the government sector are working here together with industry to jointly do this on a global basis. And I must express my gratitude and thanks to this type of collaboration, and especially to the government people worldwide, on how this is a joint mission from the people of the government, the people of the industry, to jointly make this happen and get to good products, good vaccines, good medicines very quickly. It's enabled by both sides, but it's a unique collaboration.
Yeah, maybe just to add to Paul, I mean, yeah, it's a challenge for a large organization. So just imagine for a biotech company that doesn't have the type of operating scale. And so one of the chance we have is the technology is highly scalable in terms of the ability to make bigger and bigger reactor because we don't use cells to make the product. So actually the unit of operation is pretty small. We partnered very early on with Lonza because it was very clear to us that being able to make, many hundreds of millions of doses, we could not do it alone just because the lead time to build space the math doesn't work. And so we are lucky that Lonza, with a lot of experience, had, GMP suites available right back in the spring when we talked to them. And so it has been really a big race, getting equipments delivered at all the sites, Moderna US, Lonza US, and Lonza Switzerland, where we're going to be supplying the rest of the world from Switzerland. Fill finish, because of course all those vials have to be filled, and all the suppliers. One of the places where I think we spend the most time in our case is, if you think about the increase of volume that we need in a matter of 12 months, is 1,000-fold, 1,000 times more product than we've used last year. And in any industry, you'll go see your supplier and you say, I need 1,000 times more product next year. They might look at you a bit funny. And so that's what we're able to do. A lot of collaboration, a lot of risk we have taken, financial risk, that we have taken, as Paul said, very thankful for the US government help in terms of, BARDA, Operation Warp Speed, to help us both in logistics. I have pieces of equipment that have been, escorted by the military. So the trucks didn't have to stop on the highway and on the red lights and make sure they arrive safely and so on. We've got help with suppliers. We've got financial help, because a lot of suppliers, we have to pay them upfront because it's such an incredible amount of material we're asking them that, of course, what they worry is what happens if the vaccine, God forbid, fails in the clinic, it doesn't get approved, or anything else. And so they wanted to make sure that they get paid for it. So a lot of our suppliers, we had to pay them when we ordered the raw material.
It's incredible.
It has been a big manufacturing challenge. But the other piece where I think I got very lucky is our head of manufacturing used to be the head of manufacturing of Novartis worldwide, managing more than 100 plants. And so the big luck we had is the manufacturing team at Moderna has a lot of experience at commercial scale from big pharma company, the entire team. And that was, of course, a big help in this extraordinary challenge.
Huge. And you've both mentioned Operation Warp Speed. That was created in April of this year by the White House to address some of these mission critical issues. And Moncef Slaoui is the head or the chief advisor. I'm always curious how it works operationally and how you as a company interact with Operation Warp Speed.
Well, let me start. We worked with BARDA for 6-7 years already on other vaccines, so in the past. So we were used to work with the government. And this is a big extension to that collaborative effort. The government with BARDA, and in other HHS divisions, NIH, they have a lot of expertise in vaccines, a lot of expertise through BARDA also in manufacturing and in capabilities. They have been focusing on influenza, on Ebola, on Zika, on all the different challenges in the world. And so from that collaboration, we were able to upscale our collaboration with BARDA. And so it's a very interactive collaboration with all the expertise, first of all, experts, but also the FDA, the NIH, and then with BARDA in the industry. And so that has become a very strong partnership. And so with Moncef, with a lot of vaccine experience, was able to streamline it further and accelerate a lot of decision making in the government. And so that was the way we were able to go very fast.
And maybe just to add to Paul, I think what, in my opinion, OWS has done is to integrate the different parts of a government. Because if you think about BARDA and CDC and NIH and FDA, they kind of all report into HHS. But as you can imagine, the HHS secretary and his staff have a few other things to do than kind of micromanage the development of a vaccine and the therapeutics. And if you want to go fast, you have to be able to make quick decisions. You cannot wait for next week or a meeting or committee. And so, as Paul said, by bringing in Moncef on the one hand, with incredible vaccine experience from industry, and General Perna on the other hand from DoD with incredible logistics and supply chain experience, they were able to make sure that first the government is aligned, so that FDA and NIH and CDC are aligned in terms of what do they tell industry and how do they work with industry. and helping us, and a lot of collaboration across the companies. I know, for example, my clinical team has been talking to the J&J clinical team about what did we do on diversity that has happened. It was so there's a lot of pieces that I think have been really wonderful about OWS, is this ability to have somebody on the government side with myself who understands industry, so that you don't try to convince him of something that you know he knows is true. And this is just helping a lot where every day counts. And they have been really amazing. I mean, I regularly have calls with myself at 4 or 5 in the morning. I know he's an early bird like I am. And it's just wonderful because sometimes in 10 minutes, you can solve an issue and get moving and get the teams on it. And so that's having a great tool for such a pandemic situation.
And then let me add something. And in the meantime, other countries in the world have joined too. For example, to the advanced purchase agreements, the advanced agreements now on manufacturing in Europe, in different countries around the world. Also, there is now the commitment and in order to contribute to the global development, as well as to clinical trials. Doing clinical trials in South America, in Europe, in Asia, Japan. Almost the whole world is now mobilized behind vaccines and contribute to the global effort to create vaccines. It was strongly led by the US at the start. It's still strongly led, but the world has joined in the same effort now to make sure vaccines become available on a global basis.
So important. I want to just one more time mention the survey. I know they just messaged me that they need to get that survey. There's 2 questions there. They are, would you take a vaccine, and what is your trust level in the FDA EMA scientific review process? Actually, the next 2 issues that we're going to talk about. So if people could answer that survey, and then we'll come back, since we do have a large audience today, we'll come back and we'll look at that at the end of the panel. So as we know, there remains a huge issue with public trust or lack of in these regulatory authorities, the FDA and the EMA. On October 22nd, the FDA had a 9-hour public meeting with a panel of outside medical experts. I believe there were 25. There were 3 takeaways from that meeting. People felt that the 2-month follow-up for the EUA was too short. Some individuals felt that minority populations were not well represented, and some expressed concerns about maintaining blinded trials while issuing an EUA. We've also seen several states, New York, California, some others, announce that they will independently review any federally approved vaccines before they administer to the residents. So it's such a big issue, and I know we talked about this on our prep call. How do we gain the public trust, and why is this so important? So maybe starting with you, Paul?
Well, it's of course very important that we gain the public trust, because this is going to be the opportunity and the chance to make a difference in this pandemic. And we are not yet that far in herd immunity, and if we are not careful, we are going to have a re-emerging epidemic in the countries, resurges several times a year. And that's where, we have to gain the trust. And that's where, first of all, doing a large clinical trial, doing the right safety, efficacy, and then progressively, when we can implement in the population, measure the safety as we go. And the high-risk people, the benefit risk is significantly more important, because you can prevent them from being sick, dying, or in intensive care. There, you can start by evaluating further when you implement, and that's not new for us. We do this all the time. We start with the high-risk population being exposed to vaccines or to medicines in the other case. You learn about it and you go further. And we will build the safety based on the studies. If we have 60,000 people in a study, we are not stopping following them at the end of the study. They will be followed for 2 years. And so we can update the safety as we go and get more and more comfort in the population that they will see that it works and they will see that it's safe. And the more we can be transparent about those data, hopefully, the more we can get a trust. And it will not just be the industry who will be reporting that. The FDA will review that, the DSM will review that. Other people will look at what we do, and hopefully that will be an additional trust factor as we go.
And maybe just to say too, I mean, you'll get an EUA at first, but you will keep monitoring that data so that you get a full approval as you go through the process, correctly?
The EUA will be limited to certain groups of people. We will further develop this to a BLA, to a biological license, and make sure that we can get this available on a global basis on an approval. Europe, for example, might go immediately to full approval and take somewhat more time, but EUA gives the opportunity to provide the highest risk population with a vaccine and to prevent the most serious outcome of this disease, which is death and very serious debilitation. So that's where I think it's going to be important that we have a continued evaluation of safety, continued getting the trust from the population, and being able to vaccinate a very large part, because it will be needed to get this pandemic under control.
Stéphane?
Yeah, and I will just not repeat what Paul said, but just echo a few themes. I mean, we are all extremely focused on safety. We know that vaccines are given to healthy people, and so the bar is so much higher than in the therapeutic world. And so that is very important. Of course, the FDA knows that. CBERS, it's not the first vaccine they are looking at, so they're highly aware of it. And if you look at it, this is why the development plans, while they have been fast in the eyes of the public, we have not cut corners. We went through a full phase 1, a full phase 2, a full phase 3. I think this has been, of course, as you know, highly politicized in the last few months. But I think once the data starts to flow and it's shared publicly, I mean, I think the public is going to start to see, the clinicians around the country is going to start to see the data. Those data, of course, will be published in peer-reviewed journal, like we have done for phase 1, New England Journal. And so I think when people start to see the totality of the data in those big studies and start to see key opinion leaders, commenting on those data, I think the dust is going to settle a little bit. I'm sure there's going to be some people still on the fence. The anti-vaxxer, I cannot really solve for illogical and ideologic. I only believe in one thing: it's science and data and facts. But I think some people are going to be on the fence for some time when they want to give it a bit of time. And between you and I, I'm an optimist entrepreneur. I actually think it's not a bad thing, because there is not going to be enough supply for every American on the first day of EU approval. Even though if Pfizer and us, that seems to be kind of, as we speak, and I want to be careful of timelines and potential setbacks, but are currently potentially going to be in a position to file an EUA in 2020. We said we should have 20 million doses by the end of the year. We will have 100 million doses at least in the first quarter. So if you think about it, this is not enough, because you need 2 doses per person. This is not enough for every American. And so I think it's actually going to help us from a logistics standpoint, that not everybody necessarily wants a vaccine on day one. Those who want and are relying on the data and the process, both at the company level and at the regulator level, will be able to get access to vaccines. But I think a lot is going to change once the data is going to start to come out.
I hope so. The Wall Street Journal did a survey that showed that only 20% would take the vaccine as soon as it was available, and 50% would wait and see. So I know you mentioned, Paul, herd immunity, and I think that number is around 60 to 70%. And, we need to achieve that herd immunity. So the question is, as we start seeing and we start getting vaccinated, what do you see as the time frame? When will we reach, if everything goes as planned, protective immunity as a country, as a world?
It is very difficult to predict. Fauci this morning on the news said he doesn't think that life will resume to normal before 2022. And it all depends on how people are going to accept either masks and social distancing, contact tracing, or a vaccine. And it's going to be the combination of all of that which will bring this pandemic to an end. And if you don't want to be vaccinated as a person, well, then you will have to continue to protect yourself in a different way, and also protect your family and other people. So that will be the tools. Hopefully we'll also have a few good antibodies and drugs which will be coming along, so that there is good treatment, and that can hopefully reduce mortality and severe disease. And that also will give mitigation to the whole challenge in in the world, but it will be a combination of combating this virus, either preventing, either vaccinating, or either treating, and that will put it to an end. And before the world will be done, I think it will be at least 2 years. Hopefully by the end of 2022, we'll be able to combat it in most parts of the world with all the industry together, the vaccines which are there, hopefully the medicines which are there. But that's the time frame, and it's hard work to do it in the next 2 years.
I know we've been talking too, we were talking a little bit before we started today about mask wearing, and that's become such a big issue in the United States, people who don't want to wear a mask. So if I get vaccinated with one of these vaccines, do I need to continue wearing my mask? I don't know if anybody wants to go there.
Sure. I think most probably for foreseeable future, yes, because what we won't know out of the gate right away is does the vaccine prevent you to basically transmit the virus? If you look at how the studies are being done, they are looking at the primary endpoint of disease reduction. Because what we all want to do first is to make sure that if you get infected, you don't get disease or severe disease leading to hospitalization. That's the first thing we care about. We're going to have to understand at the scientific level for the different vaccines is do they prevent infecting over humans or not? Because if you don't wear, once vaccinated, a mask, you might be in a situation where you might be protected if you have a good vaccine, but you might be spreading the virus around to people that are not vaccinated and are at risk.
And when will we start vaccinating children? In the United States, everybody gets a flu shot now, doesn't depend on age, but the trials have all been geared towards adults. None of them have been done in pediatric populations. So what's the recommendation?
Yeah, and that's very typical again, because vaccines are given to healthy people. If you look at it from a regulatory standpoint and an industry standpoint, you don't want to start vaccinating younger, teenagers and toddlers until you know from the adults that your vaccines are safe. And so we intend to start very soon after we get the data, because you need the efficacy data as well to know that there's a sense of benefit, because you don't want, again, to start vaccinating children if you don't think the vaccine might be providing protection. And so we are gearing up to be able to start and to go down in age at least to 12 years old right away. So 12 to 17 right away. What we're trying to solve for is how do we get the data by next summer? Because what we're trying to make sure is if we could get a vaccine to help us for next summer so that we can help the September 2021 kind of back to school, there will be a big impact because we talk about disease, but one piece that I think is not talked about enough is mental health, and how mental health is really getting to the worst across the world because of the lockdowns, because of the economic hurt, because of a lack of social interaction. Some, as some family members have not seen each other for a long time, and that's really important. And so I think that for the 12 to 17, we are Moderna trying to get the data by, let's say, end of June-ish. And then it's going to take more time for younger kids because you're going to have to go down in age very slowly, as is typically done. And you're going to want to start at a lower dose than the adult dose. And so by definition, you have to start at a lower dose and go down in age slowly, and then see the dose. And this is the way to do it correctly, like it's done for every virus. It's not specific to COVID, is you try a dose, you have to wait for the data, and then you have to decide, do you want to try a higher dose or are you there dose-wise? So it's just going to be baby steps in terms of getting into younger children. And we have to do that to ensure safety.
Well, we have been able to, in our Meta platform in Ebola, we are vaccinating at the moment 200,000 people in Rwanda and Congo. And we have been able to go to lower ages, and we have done that systematically, as was explained. We also have exposure, and we are learning from pregnancy, because that's another very important factor here, the safety in pregnant. And so we are vaccinating at the moment in that study pregnant women, and that's where we learn on how we probably can broaden. So it's going to all parts of population, also people living with HIV, people living with cancer, people living with comorbidities. And we have been able to do a lot of that, so showing the safety. Of course, now, like Stéphane was saying, we need to show what dose and what's the efficacy. But it's a top priority and that's part of diversity. You go to all types of population, elderly, the diverse population, African American, the comorbidities, but also the children, and try to make sure everyone is included in the clinical trials to have an answer for everyone who wants to get vaccinated.
So maybe as we come to the end here, and start with you, Paul, because you are a pioneer and an expert in global public health. Is the pandemic now endemic? And, you know, as we go through these next 3 months and hopefully come out of the COVID-19 where we are today, will we be prepared for the next pandemic? I mean, what has this taught us? Well,
many of this type of viruses were endemic. If you go to polio, if you go to measles, if you go to the past and other infectious diseases like TB, the world was able to get rid of it with a very significant effort. And so I think if the carrier is out and the human is the carrier, we should be able to get rid of the disease and avoid that it becomes pandemic. That should be the mission. For the next pandemics, I think, now we learned since Ebola, a lot of efforts where Don and Stéphane have talked about it. It's like different types of vaccines are in the making. 20 different viruses were selected to get to vaccines. The one thing which will happen now is the world will take it much more serious. Yeah? We all were taught, and when the exercise was done 3-4 years ago, or even 6 now, after Ebola, what is the next pandemic risk? And everyone thought it's going to be influenza. The next big wave of influenza. And unfortunately, it was a coronavirus, which nobody of us had expected. Unfortunately, there was a MERS and some other corona activities ongoing, but now the world will take it much more serious. And this has really to be taken as a security issue for the world, like everyone is investing in arms to protect themselves against other countries. This has to become now a critical scientific space and development space where we prepare ourselves for the common enemy in the world, which could be the next pandemic. And I think we are very well prepared to do it, but we have to go faster, better, and global in order to protect. And it's not just vaccines, it's also diagnostics. It's the primary healthcare system to pick it up. It is making sure that the whole world is protected from this type of virus. It should not happen anymore in the future, but it's a big task to solve that.
Stéphane?
Yeah, and I would just add to Paul's, because I agree 100% with what he just said. It's one of my big personal objectives in 2021. I think what we did on MERS, that was very instrumental to SARS-CoV-2. We should do on all the key 20 top pathogens that are well known to scientists that are at risk of mutation and being the next outbreak and or worst case pandemic. The other piece is manufacturing. You know, I want to start building around the world a few never again plants where you could basically, in a matter of 30 days, you know, it took us 42 days to make our first lot of human grade material. If we had a much bigger factory, we should have been able to ship, you know, and make much more product much faster. And that's something for me very important. The beauty of a platform like ours is it's the same manufacturing plant, whether it's, you know, the next strain is, you know, the Zika or flu or Nipah or anything. And so I think this is very important. We need to invest more in science and early stage clinical development, because, you know, if you think about what we did this year, we run a phase 1 to find the dose that we needed, and we run a phase 2 to get enough safety database, you know, on around 600 people before we were allowed by the FDA to start the phase 3 on 30,000 people. Now, what if we could have done the MERS vaccine in a clinic and had picked the dose and had done already, you know, a phase 2? The question is, could you have started much earlier the phase 3? Question mark, to be discussed with the agency in the future. But I think there's a lot of things we can do on science, on clinical development, and on manufacturing, so that this never happens again. And in all my discussions with head of states around the world, people are very eager. You know, I had a couple of discussions where, a bit like Paul said, around, you know, the arms and the military. When you ask a head of state, why are you spending, you know, literally billions on nuclear weapons, hoping to never use them? and you cannot spend, you know, a tenth of that for infectious disease just to make sure that the next outbreak or pandemic, which will happen again, is prevented.
Well, hopefully we will take some of these lessons learned forward and keep them in our post-pandemic world. I just want to thank the two of you so much for joining us today. I know that you're both so incredibly busy. Our deep thanks goes out to you and your entire teams at Moderna and J&J who are working day and night to find solutions for this devastating pandemic. Your work is truly essential in arming the world's population against new waves of COVID-19 infection and saving lives, restoring the economy, and the returning of our daily lives to what we hope will be somewhat the normal that we used to know. You're heroes, all of you. These are really unprecedented and uncertain times, but together we'll find solutions. So be safe, be well, wear a mask, get vaccinated, and thank you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you.